What's up everybody, Jason from C&C Exotic Reptiles. Today we're going to talk about ultrasounds. Basically, are they worth it and do you need one as a breeder? This is something that comes up quite a bit when you're starting breeding or you've kind of progressed and you've had some luck, is should you invest the money to purchase an ultrasound? Now this ultrasound right here is the one that I have and I've used in the past. It doesn't even have a brand name. I got it off Amazon, and we're going to talk about the specifics of what makes this ultrasound good, what makes it bad, and do you need to buy one in general. Before we dive into the specifics of the ultrasound itself, let's talk about the purposes of the ultrasound and why you need one or why you don't need one to figure out if it's a good value for you. So when I first started breeding, it was something that seemed to be like this thing that would give me the inside scoop on how to breed these animals. And in one sense, it is. These things can give you an inside look on exactly what's happening with your follicle development of the snakes that you're trying to breed. You can put this thing up to the animal and figure out the millimeter size, is this animal ready to breed, and all that good stuff. However, as I've advanced in breeding, I find myself using this less and less and just start using the feel of the snakes more. It is not easy to find a good follicle with an ultrasound. So step one is you really need to know how to use this thing if you're going to invest into it. If you don't know how to use it, you could have the most advanced ultrasound in the world and you're probably not going to have any luck with it. You're going to find out nothing new. If you don't know how to use an ultrasound, they're not super difficult, but you do need to understand the fundamentals of how to use it. I no longer use this, at least throughout the majority of my breeding. I may use this at certain times to figure out where a female is. So if a female's not breeding, but I feel like she has follicles, I may bust this thing out and try it. See, does she actually have follicles, or what am I actually feeling? Does she actually have follicles, or just confirming what I'm feeling when I'm palpating? So palpating is number one. Before I even break this thing out, I'll palpate my boas or my pythons or whatever I'm trying to do this thing on, and do I feel for follicles? If I feel follicles, I really don't need to bring this thing out because I already have them. However, if they're in this questionable phase where I feel them, but I just kind of want to get a snapshot on size, I will break this thing out and I will do a quick ultrasound of the animal. We're going to go do an ultrasound so you can see what I'm going to see on the screen. Another time I'll use this is the female's not breeding, but I know she has follicles. I know they're good. And that might help me troubleshoot, is it the male, is it the female, what's actually happening, why is she not breeding, or why is the male not breeding? Because she should be. Based on what I'm feeling, there should be follicles in there, and she should be ready to breed, but nothing's happening. So that's another thing where I'll break this thing out and just confirm how big are the follicles. Usually, until they're about 20 to 25 millimeters, no breeding is going to occur. So if they're at 19 or 20, may give me the peace of mind to know that, okay, she's maybe just needs a little bit more time. But something to consider is this thing is not the magic bullet. It's not going to solve all your problems. I bred for many years without the use of an ultrasound. It's just a nice tool to have. Another time that I will use an ultrasound, and I find myself using it more for this than anything else throughout the year, is after the female's ovulated. You can put an ultrasound up to the animal and tell, does she have good babies? Because the babies, you'll be able to see right around week 6 or 7, you'll actually see little spines. They look like little cinnamon rolls that are sitting inside the snake. Before that, you're not going to really see much. But if you do not see those spines, you're going to see what looks to be like big follicles. And those are essentially slugs. And this, to me, is where I get my value out of the ultrasound, is that it gives me the peace of mind to kind of predict how my season is going to be in advance of that actually occurring. A lot of the times I'll have 20, 30, 40 boas that have ovulated, but only a portion of those actually have good babies. So if I'm looking at these snakes, I'm thinking, wow, this could be an amazing pairing. I want to see if there's anything good in there. I'll be able to use the ultrasound and figure out, does she actually have good babies in her, or is she carrying slugs? And through the years, this has been a tool to really help me learn my animals. It's helped me learn what snakes do when they're developing follicles, what snakes do when they're carrying slugs versus carrying real babies. So in a sense, this will expedite that learning curve, but it's not necessary. And I could 1000% breed without this. I actually haven't even busted this thing out this year. So let's talk about the ultrasound itself. Now, ultrasounds range in price from $1,000 up to probably $1 million for the ones that hospitals use, the really advanced ones. Now, we're obviously not spending the $1 million on an ultrasound. This one right here was a cheap ultrasound. I got it off Amazon. Again, it doesn't even have a name on it. It's just a ultrasound scanner. It says hand ultrasound scanner, and it was off Amazon. I figured, well, I got a return policy, let's give it a shot, and it actually worked pretty well. It is important to note that this ultrasound itself is just the machine. It doesn't really do a whole lot. What's really important in the ultrasound is the probe. So the probe that you need to use for reptiles, for the most part, is this linear probe. It looks just like this. The convex probe, which I'll show in a second, has this curve on it, and it will not really work for snakes. You can get it to work for like big animals, but for the most part, that's meant for like goats and pigs and stuff like that. You could actually see babies on humans with this. When my wife was pregnant, we actually put the ultrasound up and you could see the baby inside, which was pretty cool. The probe is what makes the difference. This probe here, I think, is a 5, 7, and 8 megahertz. The lower the megahertz, the more penetration you'll see through the animal. The larger, the more convex probe, that one I believe is 1, 3, and 5. So at 1 and 3, it's shooting too deep and it's going to shoot right through the animal. You're not going to see what you want to see. At 5 is really what I've found is good for those larger snakes, like a big boa, giant boa, or some berms and retics. You're probably going to want a 3 or a 3.5 megahertz probe. That's what makes the difference on these, is the megahertz. Think about it as like a bass wave. The lower the frequency, the more it's going to penetrate. So a guitar is going to kind of ping off it. It's got the high frequency. A bass wave is going to penetrate deeper. It's going to go through. That's what the megahertz determines on what you're going to see exactly with these ultrasounds. This is the convex probe. This probe has this convex surface, and it doesn't work very well for reptiles from what I've found. It will actually help me on some of my bigger berms if I really want to see what's going on. But again, I've kind of, now that I've had it and the newness and the cool factor of an ultrasound has worn off, I really don't use it. It's kind of a pain. It takes time. I can tell what's going on in the animal by palpating way quicker than I can by getting this ultrasound out. So I rarely use it for breeding purposes anymore. I will use it for determining babies. Are they there? Are they slugs? Are they good? What's actually happening? Did this female actually ovulate and I'm just watching her sit on her heat? She didn't just reabsorb her follicles and I think she has babies, but she actually has nothing. All of this has to come into play when you decide, is the ultrasound the right tool for you? Is it going to help you in your breeding? Is it worth your investment? I would say if you're getting breeding, don't worry about the ultrasound. It's not going to help you. The fundamentals of breeding are there, and the ultrasound is just a tool. It's like buying a different cage. Because I have a different cage doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to breed better, I'm going to breed more. It has nothing to do with that. If you understand how to breed, the ultrasound is totally useless to you beyond giving you some type of an inside glimpse. If you have a bunch of money to spend, then by all means, go out, buy an ultrasound. I found that that one works really well, and for the money, it's hard to beat. $1,000, you really can't find a better tool in that price range. There are some really nice ones that if you jump to the $5,000 and $10,000 range, they will work much better than this, and they're more user-friendly. I just can't justify to spend that kind of money on an ultrasound, which is just, again, a tool that I don't use very often and is not helping me progress my breeding. So for the purpose of the video, let's actually do an ultrasound on this girl here. I'm going to change my frequency to 5.5 megahertz, and now my ultrasound's ready to go. The nice thing about this specific ultrasound is you can put it around your neck and it makes it really easy to see things. So this is a T-positive sun glow fire motley. So got my ultrasound gel. I just use this stuff. It comes in a big jar. The stuff, it's Aquasonic 100, doesn't matter, you can buy any brand. We're going to wake this girl up a little bit, and where the follicles start are about right at the lower 2/3 of the body. So right here is where her follicles are going to be. I'm going to put the ultrasound on her, and we'll see if we can see this. It's kind of hard to do this while trying to show on the camera, so let me see if I can find them first. But right there is the top of a follicle. So if I'm going to hit freeze, just get a better picture of it. So it's a little difficult to see, but right there is the top of one follicle, and then there's another right there. Now I can drop a point and I can measure these. I have to somewhat approximate because it's not perfect. But if you can see, I put a point right there. I'm going to drop it down and measure. But right here is the bottom of the follicle. And that follicle size is about 22 millimeters. So you guys tell me, was that ultrasound helpful? In one sense, I would say absolutely, it's extremely helpful. In another sense, I would normally just palpate that girl, and if I could feel follicles, she's probably ready to go. Now, as you get more experience with palpating, this does become a lot easier. So don't freak out if you don't have $1,000 to spend on an ultrasound and you can't feel follicles with palpating. Generally, by the time the females have follicles that are ready to breed, the follicles become much easier to feel through palpation. Prior to that, it can be a little bit challenging, specifically when they're in that 10 to 12 millimeter range. I've actually used the ultrasound to ultrasound the females throughout a long course of the whole year, and I've noticed that they do carry follicles for a good portion of the year. It's not until I start changing my breeding conditions that forces them to grow. Now, this is a whole separate topic of how to force follicle growth and how to develop them. This is what would happen in the wild with the temperature changes, the light cycles, the humidity, all these factors, the feeding, all of this comes into play into getting those follicles to develop. And this is something that, again, can be used as that tool. You can ultrasound them in, let's say, July, and then you can do it again in August, September, October, November, and you can track the growth. I've done this in the past. I don't do it anymore because I have it kind of figured out and I know what I'm doing at this point. But a lot of this is because there was nobody like me on these YouTube videos actually telling me this stuff. This was all kind of through books, and things are somewhat cryptic. Nobody wants to give out their trade secrets of what's going on and when to do certain things. This can be very helpful too when you have those late season females. So those females that it's now March or April and you're like, man, I really wish this female bred for me, but she didn't. They may still be ready and primed to grow follicles and to actually breed just late season. It's not uncommon for boas to be born in September and even October. It is a little bit late at that point, but for the most part, the breeding is going to occur sometime between October and it will go all the way up and through June. Really, April is kind of like that cutoff where if they haven't bred yet, they're probably not going to go. Maybe they just needed another year to develop. And it really depends on when you're bringing your females into this breeding condition. The males will breed for the most part anytime a female is ready. The females are very important to get into that condition, and that's you. So when people say breeding season, I kind of cringe a little bit because it's not a season. The season is the whole year. It's not like you can just go buy a female and say, well, it's breeding season, I'm going to breed them. No, it's a year-long process, and that's why I always recommend buying young baby animals, juvenile animals, raising them up yourself, raising them in your conditions, because how I keep them is different than how you may keep them, and vice versa. I can't just take an animal from you and all of a sudden breed it if you haven't brought it into condition. That's a process, and that takes my whole season, my whole year to do that. This just happens to be like pairing season, then you have baby season, but breeding season is a year-long activity. You guys let me know, was this video helpful? Hopefully it was. Hopefully it helps you guys make up your mind on the ultrasound that you want to buy. I don't have a bunch to compare to. I have used the more expensive $5,000 and $10,000 ultrasounds. They can give you a better picture at times if you know how to use it, but the more expensive the ultrasound, the more features, the more difficult it is to hone in your settings to make sure that you are actually using the right settings for the specific animal and for the specific ultrasound. Let me know in the comments. If you haven't already, check out my social media, my Patreon. It's all really good stuff. I appreciate the support. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and until next video, let's keep it moving. Thanks, guys.